So the opening question for this video is going to be provocative, but I think it's something that has been repeated in the political arena a number of times, so it's worth looking at a bit. Is Britain broken? Is Britain broken as a society, as a country? Um, it's a very profound statement to make, or rather, a question to ask, more question than a statement. Um, and I have to say that I will not argue too strongly against people who make the claim because I totally understand where it's coming from. But I myself have avoided saying that no matter how frustrated I am about certain things, I've avoided saying that. Why? Because it's very finite, it's a very absolute statement. Saying that a whole country is broken is sort of suggesting we've had a complete societal collapse. And I do think that would be an exaggeration. I think that would be hyperbole. Um, and the thing with hyperbole is it's not really helpful to solve problems. It may be useful in terms of drawing attention to the problems, but it doesn't actually help in terms of dealing with them. Um, so to answer that from the outset, is Britain broken? No, not as a whole, but I do think we have significant social problems. I do think we have seen a significant lack of public trust in institutions, to government, and other sources of power and authority and people who make decisions. There is a significant decline in trust. Now, I wouldn't say the trust has ever been that high in recent decades. I don't think it's a case of, oh, well, last year it was good or 10 years ago it was good. I think it's been low for a very long time. I think it is fair to say that in the past there were frustrations, there were societal problems, but the trust in government was slightly higher. I mean, I honestly think in, let's say, I don't know, let me throw out a figure, pre 1990, pre 1980, I think the overall trust in government, people complained, but I don't think it was the absolute level it is now of just disillusionment. And I do think that the internet has been a big role in that. The way that things are reported, the way things are discussed now, social media plays a huge role, the 24-hour news cycle. And yes, disinformation, it has to be said, that is also a factor. But because disinformation is a problem, doesn't mean that there is no basis for public anger. It doesn't mean the public is completely foolish, because it's the public that directly experience the problems that we have. For me, top of the list is crime. That's really something that corrodes our society. It's a serious problem. But the reason I avoid saying Britain's broken is because if Britain's broken, so is every country. What I mean by that is there's not a single country on this earth you can look at and honestly say hasn't got problems. And in some cases, it's significantly worse than the UK. In the UK, we complain that criminals don't get tough enough sentences. I believe that. I think that's a valid criticism. But in a country like Haiti, the criminals are literally running the country. Literally. They control entire sections of the capital, Port-au-Prince. In London, there's significant public concern about crime. But I do think it would be hyperbole to make an outright statement that they run the capital. I know Sadiq Khan posted a few days ago about certain crimes that have actually dropped in London, but that doesn't cover things like phone theft and shoplifting. Um, I welcome any reduction in any type of crime, but unless it's across the board, then people are going to be saying, "Well, what about that?" And with good basis, with good basis. I have long argued that institutions in this country have failed to grasp public sentiment. By institutions, I mean the government, successive governments, Labour and Tory, the BBC as the state broadcaster, other networks as well. I mean, just because they're not the state broadcasters doesn't mean they're immune from criticism. GB News likes to present itself as being, the courageous little independent network that's just calling the problems out. They are not perfect. I mean, one thing I would cite about GB News is political interference when Nigel Farage can simultaneously be a party leader and a pundit. That gets into serious questions about media independence. And granted, GB News isn't the state broadcaster, but it's still influence. And then that influence, when they are promoting an agenda to the public, it's it's relevant. Institutions I named, the government, BBC. I would say definitely the justice establishment, Crown courts, magistrate courts, judges themselves, definitely the sentencing council. I don't want to sound like a broken record with the sentencing council, but I do find it curious that it isn't brought up more. I find it curious that more people don't criticise it, because if they knew that these are the people responsible for setting sentencing guidelines, I think they would face significantly more scrutiny. I know, because I've done my research, I've looked into, well, this is why judges are making decisions they are, although I don't let judges off the hook either. They say their hands are tied, well, they could be a lot more outspoken in changing the law. If they really think their hands are tied, they can say, well, look, give us tougher guidelines so we can work with it. So I don't really accept this argument of passing the buck. So the legal establishment, I think, has utterly, utterly failed the public. Um, what else? The police forces. The public trust in the police has really plummeted. And I think part of the problem here is the public really sincerely believe that the police have utterly the wrong priorities. Either they're spending money on a pride flag on a vehicle, or they are arresting people for non-crime hate incidents rather than, for example, arresting shoplifters and making a significant presence on the streets. The use of um, community patrol officers, community support officers, I think they're used too much because there's no power of arrest. And criminals themselves know this. What people want to see is bobbies on the beat and tackling real crime. Violent assault, public drunkenness, antisocial behaviour, shoplifting, those sort of things that really corrode people's quality of life. So every institution I've spoken about, the legal establishment, successive governments, the BBC, they've all had scandals. They've all had scandals. In the case of the justice establishment, it's not necessarily corruption per se. It's more just, I would say it's a scandal from the point of view that there is a complete absence of public trust, and they have not bothered to do anything about it. In the case of governments, we've had, over the years, because I'm going back a bit here, MPs' expenses, and more recently, there's been other things. Now, people might say, why are you bringing up things from 15 years ago? But this points just a gradual corrosion of public trust. I think in the case of governments, certainly during the last Conservative government, the sheer hypocrisy of breaking lockdown rules whilst imposing them on the public infuriated people. And when Tories absurdly claim that Boris Johnson is the answer to the problems, they're failing to understand that he's a big part of the problems. Jacob Rees-Mogg said that I watched a documentary presented by Laura Kunzberg. Rees-Mogg absurdly claimed that getting rid of Johnson is when the rot started set in. Well, it's true that Johnson won a landslide or a comfortable election victory in 2019, but all the sleaze came after that. So I think people were infuriated by the Cummings scandal, by the lockdown party, and Tories say, "Oh, it's blowing out of proportion." I don't accept that for a second. I think if you are imposing laws on the public, if you're giving a £10,000 fine to a student for having a party, why should the Prime Minister be allowed to do that? Why should the Prime Minister's advisor be allowed to get away with that? And it isn't just within the Conservative Party. Members of the SNP, members of Labour were breaking these rules. So politicians need to understand how much they destroy public trust when they are guilty of double standards. The Immigrations Minister recently was forced to resign because she threw out, no, excuse me, my mistake, not the Immigrations Minister, the Homelessness Minister. The Minister for Homelessness threw out her tenants, which is one of the main sources of homelessness in this country. She did have to resign, but that's the sort of thing where people think the politicians are only in it for themselves. Now, I've always been a little bit cautious with this. I don't agree with saying all politicians are selfish, all politicians are only in it for themselves. I do think there's politicians that genuinely work hard and genuinely want to make positive changes in society. So I've never been one to just vilify all politicians. I don't agree with that. But there is enough politicians messing up to cause a problem. And I think there's also an issue of public accessibility now. This is a balancing act because MPs have faced real threats, and as we know, sadly, two have died. They've been murdered, Joe Cox and David Amos, in recent years. So there needs to be some common sense security taken, but that has to be balanced with the public must be allowed to express anger and criticism. I contacted Lord Timpson recently. I've been quite vocal about that because I think it was an utter disgrace when, on being appointed prisons minister, one of his first statements was to say that we punish too many people. I thought that was incredibly tone deaf and just plain wrong. It's also factually wrong because career criminals routinely escape custodial sentencing. You know, the liberal left, of which Lord Timpson's very much part, um, they say that prisons failed. They say that that model has totally failed. But the implication is therefore community sentencing is some resounding success. It absolutely isn't. So if you're going to say prisons failed, then say that community sentencing has also failed because it doesn't deter criminals. There was a woman up for shoplifting recently, and she had been arrested 4 times for this. She still avoided jail. So it's that just shows that career criminals or repeat offenders routinely get away with it. Clearly, a community sentence is not a deterrent anyway. I digress. I wrote to Lord Timpson in the House of Lords, and the first thing that came up on their website was we do not tolerate abuse. Any abusive or insulting messages may be referred to the police. And they said threatening as well. Well, threatening, I understand that. You can't go around threatening people. Um, but my one of the questions I asked him was I actually cited this. And I said, Lord Timpson, you may consider criticism to be offensive. Well, so be it. You know, at some point we have to say, we have to just speak up. We have to say, this is a person in a position of power. They should be subject to scrutiny, questions, criticism. If he wants to defend himself, that's his right. But whether he replies or not, I don't know. I'd be very surprised if he bothers replying. Um, and I get it, you know, government minister's going to have a lot of correspondence, but you wonder how much time do they take to respond to the public. I think for him to say that we punish too many people is deeply insulting to victims of crime, and that was my question. I wanted to challenge that. I wanted to really ask him, Lord Simpson, do you seriously believe that people guilty of murder, arson, rape, serious damaging crimes shouldn't face prison? Now he said that 2/3 of inmates shouldn't be there. But I guarantee you that 2/3 of people in prisons in England and Wales are not minor criminals. They're not there for nothing. Okay? They're definitely not shoplifters. At least not first time shoplifters. So the implication Lord Timpson was making is that most prisoners are just minor criminals. They shouldn't be there. I don't accept that for a second. So he's saying only 1/3 should actually be there. According to Lord Timpson, we have about 100,000 prisoners. According to him, only 30,000 should actually be in prison. So he wants to release 60 to 70,000 people free to terrorise the public. That is an absolute disgrace. Now, I get as prisons minister, his remit is to focus on penal reform and dealing with that issue. But calling on criminals to be released in the public, I don't think is the answer. What Lord Timpson should be doing is supporting his own government in their pledges to build more prison spaces because common sense shows that will ease pressure on the system. It will ease pressure on the staff and ease pressure on inmates alike. Surely he'd be in favour of that, you would think. Anyway, I've been talking a lot about the crime issue, but there's been other things as well. I think that when you see BBC scandals, well, it actually does involve crime. When Hugh Edwards avoids a custodial sentence despite being engaged in prolific predatory behaviour, he avoids a custodial sentence, and yet we still have the model of license fees, and you could face criminal prosecution for not paying it. That should be a civil offence at most. At most. Um, so I think the BBC definitely has a strongly elitist streak, and I don't think they see it now. I happen to think that some BBC productions are world class. I think the BBC, when it's at its best, it can be genuinely good. It can be genuinely good journalism. And when it comes to something like Israel and Gaza, I trust the BBC more than other sources. I do not trust the Daily Telegraph. I don't trust GB News because I think they're extremely, extremely pro Israel. You know, the BBC has been attacked by both sides, but I think they really have tried to get a balance on this, and it's very difficult. They haven't been perfect, but I think I trust them more than some sources. Nevertheless, I do think there's an elitism in the BBC. There is a deeply entrenched politically correct culture in the BBC, which infuriates a lot of people because it's tone deaf. Um, so the things like that, I think they just miss the mark completely. I've spoken about institutions. I didn't mention universities, and I really should. Now, this is a little bit more niche because it more directly affects students, but we have a situation there where you have Chinese state interference, and our universities have done nothing about it. When there has been examples of Chinese students harassing their peers, threatening their peers, what they have done is given generic sort of memos for people to respect each other. That's not good enough. Um, Maybe that's not so relevant as other things because it doesn't directly affect the public. It's more about students, but it's just yet another example of institutions failing in what should be common sense areas. Because all the things I'm talking about are basically common sense. These are not extraordinary demands. It's just common sense. I put the justice system, for me, it's at the top. But there's other frustrations that people have in the NHS and the transport system. When railway companies charge extortionate amounts and they routinely fail their customers. Um, we hear about net zero and we hear about the push to make it all of it's more green. Maybe more people would use the railway system if it wasn't so expensive and if they actually delivered. I think railway companies are incredibly arrogant. They don't seem to understand public frustration. I mean, if there's a train delay, they'll make grudging, excuses. In many cases, they won't even bother apologizing. I think it's not good enough. The country that gave the world railway should really be better than this. Um, what else? I mentioned police forces. Like I say, the public perception is police have utterly the wrong priorities. They harass people for non-crime hate incidents, essentially for having opinions, um, and do nothing but shoplifters. The police have a hell of a lot to answer for. And their response will be, we have officers dealing with dangerous criminals all the time, risking their lives. And that is true. There are examples of individual officers showing courage. But the public will focus on the other stuff because that just should not be happening at all. So it's not really good enough to say, well, the public never see the good stuff. If you are doing the bad stuff, if you are lacking common sense, if you're using the wrong priorities, you can't really complain about the media and the public focusing on that. It's the responsibility of police chiefs to get their act together, to tell their officers police crime. Don't police things that people don't care about or that come across as overreach. Because again, during the pandemic, the police were very zealous on, telling people they couldn't be outside in their front gardens. And yet when it comes to shoplifting today, they don't care. They literally don't care. I mean, we essentially have a situation in Britain today where you can basically shoplift and get away with it. It's it's absolutely appalling. That is a corrosion of society. I think that actually it reminds me of the broken window theory. That is to say, so-called small crimes being tolerated allows major crimes to then be enabled. It's the idea of kind of trickling up. So a criminal might think if I could get away with shoplifting, maybe I'll also get away with assault, and then it goes up and up, and crime in general just becomes normalized and accepted. That should never be the case. I think youth crime is a serious problem in this country. Um, there's yet another awful case that's just happened in Kent. A man, 49-year-old man, Alexander Cashman, was violently attacked by three teenage thugs. A vicious, sustained assault, and he sadly died. Of course, they have not been named for legal reasons. But let's see what happens when it comes to sentencing. Let's see if they get a murder charge and not a manslaughter charge. They'll probably get a manslaughter charge. And they'll probably do a few years each. That is disgusting. It's perverse. It's wrong. Um, so I think that the public, we have a situation where adults are living in fear of teenagers. That's not right. It's absolutely not right. The Sentencing Council deserve blame for that. Judges deserve blame for that. The government deserves blame for that. They all have the power to make the situation change, to get tougher penalties, to crack down on this sort of crime. Police forces also. So why don't they? Why don't they? Starmer can talk tough on crime as much as he wants, but actions speak a hell of a lot louder than words. So Anyway, I know the tone of this video comes across as very negative, but I just want to get all the stuff out in the open. There's other stuff going on as well. I haven't even mentioned immigration. And as much as I don't like some of the things that are going on around those hotel protests, I'm definitely not living in a bubble. We cannot support everyone, and the public have a right to be infuriated when foreign criminals are not deported. And judges to protect them, I think they should have to answer to the public. Peacefully, I'm talking here, obviously. Um, I mentioned the incident and the thing about Lord Simpson. Like I say, the House of Lords website was, we will not tolerate threats, we will not tolerate abuse. So it's all about self-protection. And I know there has to be some security methods. But I think if you're a Lord, you damn well should be able to take criticism from the public, especially if you're unelected. Yet you're in a position of power. So I think there's very deep frustration out there. I don't think this is a happy country right now. I think there's a lot of angry people. I think there's a lot of frustrated people. And a lot of that is the fault of establishments, just institutions just showing incredible tone deaf ignorance to public opinion. They're not acting on it. They're just not acting on public opinion, at least not sufficiently. When I've had correspondence with the Sentencing Council, they claim that they do understand public sentiments. If that is really true, then why are they not acting on it? So it could actually be worse. Maybe they do understand, but they simply don't care. Public consultation, which is limited, I think is just window dressing. It's just, well, look, we're doing something. But they never really change. So I have no confidence whatsoever in the Sentencing Council. Um, in Scotland, they actually have a policy that if an offender is under the age of 24, not 18, 24, they will be treated as a minor. That's that's where we're at. So a 23-year-old murderer, is a minor. He's slower brain development. We shouldn't treat him like the thug that he or she is. Um, it's just absolutely infuriating. So is Britain broken? I think that's hyperbole, but I think we've got a lot of problems. It's not all bad. I'm sure, you can find plenty of positive things in society. You find everyday examples of people being kind to each other. The British are incredibly generous people. I think it's one thing I would cite about my compatriots. I think we're very good at giving to charity and, helping those less fortunate is one thing that I think the British are good at. Look at the generosity we've shown to Ukrainians. We've been at the forefront of that. People have opened up their homes. People have been, I know that from experience. I'm involved in my local Ukrainian community. Um, there is also many examples of, well, I was going to say we don't have the problems some other countries have. That we don't have major natural disasters. We have crime, but we are not Haiti, we're not Colombia, we're not Mexico, we're not South Africa, um, we're not even the United States. I mean, the average small American city has significantly higher crime rates than London or Birmingham. That does need to be considered, especially when the Americans think they can lecture us on anything. Um, we do have a problem where freedom of speech is under assault, yet we do have a vibrant press. Now, people could complain about the press, but thank God that they're there because they cover this stuff. If they didn't cover, you know, any number of these cases, we wouldn't even know about them. I wouldn't be able to make videos. So I consider, as much as the press really irritate me sometimes with their biases, the fact that they exist is in itself a good thing. They should be open to criticism, but a free press, a press able to criticize those in power is very important. They should be open to criticism themselves, but their role is very important. Um, we have a lot of interesting things in this country. We have the free museum thing is a very good thing brought in by the last Labour government. That's good. The fact that you could go in a museum and it's free. We have many points of interest. We have many beautiful natural landscapes. Our cities can be vibrant and interesting. We have a very rich history in this country. Um, yes, the whole culture war thing comes in there. The left trying to bring down statues and all the rest of it, but it's there, right? We have a rich history. Um, and there are many, many other good things about this country. It's just that all this negative stuff that I'm talking about, it's about power, accountability, and public empowerment. And I think the anger comes from the fact that the public just don't feel empowered. The public feel powerless. and it's a serious problem. So institutions in general, am I saying they get everything wrong? No, but I do think they're guilty of being very detached and failing to act on this. And we've heard warnings of violence breaking out again this summer. A lot of that is over the migrant issue, but I think other things will bubble up as well. Um, all in all, I think we need to remind ourselves not to overthink this stuff, because honestly, if you do, you'll just completely lose it. You'll get infuriated. There is good stuff out there, but I think it's urgent that these things are addressed. Because it might be hyperbole to say that Britain is broken, but we do have a serious problem with lack of trust in institutions, lack of faith in politicians and judges, in the police, in the media, across the board. Um, Now, there might be some people who just like complaining about everything, but frankly, a lot of the complaints right now do have a basis. So a lot more can be done. And also, just because other countries are much worse doesn't mean we can't improve the situation here. We greatly can, and we should, because quality of life gets affected by all of this. People's mental health. If you're feeling angry a lot of the time, if you're feeling disillusioned, that has an effect on mental health. It creates anxiety, and it raises blood pressure. It's not good. I will say one good thing that I do welcome. Just Stop Oil seem to have genuinely stopped their nonsense. So at least we don't have to put up with them infuriating the public anymore. That's something. I welcome it. Jeremy Kyle is no longer on television. I welcome that. So, if you look beneath the surface, there's always some good things, but there is a lot of things out there that deeply frustrate people, and I think you could choose to just switch off and not care about any of it, but that's almost impossible because even if you don't read newspapers, even if you try not to care, at some point one of these things is going to affect you because So I think as society, it's legitimate to raise anger, raise concerns as long as it's done peacefully. But those in power have to accept criticism. If they genuinely think it's unfair, they can defend themselves, but they have to understand public anger.